A lightwave artist in the community recently needed to show how hot and cold water flow through pipes, and when they come together, they form warm water. So I thought we could take a look at one way of setting that up using particles and wind emitters. And so what I have here is just a basic little object of a piping structure, and we're going to have down each one of these pipes we'll have we'll have one be hot and one be cold, and then they'll join here and become warm water. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to go ahead and add I'm going to add a particle emitter. So I'm going to go over to the Items tab and Dynamic Object, choose Particle, and we're going to call this Hot. This is going to be our hot water emitter, and click OK. Okay, and it's kind of big, so I'm going to shrink that down. Let's try 0.2, and actually I'm going to make it even smaller, 0.1. And that looks like it'll work. So I'm going to move that over to this pipe right here, and just to make sure, I'm going to shrink it down just a little bit more, just so that we have it fitting inside that pipe. Okay, and that looks like that'll work. Okay, I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit here. Okay, and I'm going to scrub through. We can see that some particles are being born, but they're not going anywhere, and we'll solve that one in a second. But what I'm going to do is, just to save time, I'm going to clone this. So clone one copy, and I'm going to move it over here. Okay. So if this is our hot water, this will be our cold water. So let me go ahead and rename it, just so that we don't get confused. Cold. Okay, and so now we got hot and cold water starting off, and over the 60 frames we're going to have some water, but we need to get it moving. Let's just start with, well, while we have this selected, we'll go ahead and start with the cold water. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, and I'm going to make a wind emitter that's going to carry these particles through this pipe. So let's go over to Items, Add, Dynamic Object, Wind, and we're going to call this cold water, so that we know that it belongs, this wind emitter is going to belong to this particle emitter. Okay, and right now it's gigantic, so 0.15. We're probably going to go even smaller. Let's try, well, 15. Let's try 40. We'll start there and just see what happens. So for the wind mode, instead of direction, let's choose animation path. It's going to ask us if we want to make path items, and we're going to want to. It's going to create two to begin with, so I'll hit OK. And right now, if I zoom out, we can see there's one of them, and I'm just going to bring that back down. Okay. And then let's put that, say, right here, and that's going to be handle 2. Handle 1, I'm going to put right where the particle emitter starts. Okay, so we can see it over in perspective a little bit better. I'm going to close this down for right now. We can get back to the properties panel just so that we can see, and I'm going to leave all 4 windows up just so that we can make sure that we're seeing what we need to see. So right now, if I scrub through, the particles are going to travel the direction of that wind. Okay, but I need them to go kind of the direction of the pipe. So I'm going to take and create a few more handles, and a really fast way of doing that is with this one selected, I'm going to clone it, hit OK, and then I'm just going to move that kind of to bend with the pipe, and I'm going to clone it again, and then I'm going to move that to be right here at the T junction. Okay, so now the particles are going to, you can see that they're flowing the direction of that wind. Okay, and so I just see one shooting off here, and then of course these are shooting off. We're gonna fix that later, but let's go ahead and just work with this. Okay, the one thing that I see is that I kind of want them to stop right about here. So one thing we can do is we can control the power of that wind. So I'm going to hit, I'm going to go over to the wind emitter, P for properties, and for power, I'm just going to use the mini slider, and I'm going to scrub down until I see that on frame 60 they stop about right here. Okay, so let's just round that off to 50. Okay, so our animation for our cold water is flowing through that pipe, and it's going to stop here. Okay, let's do the same thing for our hot water. So I'm going to go ahead and add another wind emitter, and I'm going to call this hot water. And the size, 0.1, I think we did maybe 50. I don't remember the size, but we can always go back and check that later. But let's just say that this will work. And I'm going to change the wind mode from direction to animation path. Make path items. Yep, I want to do that. So, and I don't remember what the power was on the last one. I think we said 50. I'll go ahead and do that. We can always change it. I'm going to grab this handle, and I'm going to move it down. And let's move it over to here. And then I'm going to grab handle number 1 for this wind emitter. I'm going to put it here. Now I just realized that I'm moving it on frame 60. I'm going to keyframe it on 0, delete the frame on 60, come over to this handle and keyframe it on 0 and delete it at 60. I don't want to animate it. Now the nice thing is I can animate it. If I want to animate the wind path over time, I can, but in this case I really don't want to. So I'm going to go ahead and clone this and move it over, and I'm going to clone it again and move it over. Okay. So our animation, now we have the hot and cold water coming together. Okay, so we're really close to what we want to set up. I'm going to expand my timeline from 60 frames to 90 frames. And what we're going to do is, now we could extend the wind emitter and have it travel up through here so that hot and cold are actually mixing. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to add another particle emitter. Okay? You could, remember, you could just keep cloning and mixing the hot and cold right there. But I'm going to add another emitter. But first, just so I don't make the same mistake, I'm going to come over to frame 0. And I'm going to add a particle emitter. And I'm going to call this warm. Okay? And let's size this down. And I think we went a little smaller than that. 75, 75, 75. Okay. And let's take that particle emitter, and we're going to put it right here at the T-junction where our water is mixing. And then instead of using I could use a wind emitter, but instead of using a wind emitter, let's go ahead and just have this particle emitter shoot the particles down the Z. So P for properties, let's move this over. And we'll go over to motion, and for down the Z, I'm just going to increase this. Let's go over to frame 90, and let's fire the particles down that pipe. Okay, so we'll just say, let's do an even 500. Okay, let's calculate. Okay, the particles are being affected by that wind, so I'm actually going to move them. So I'm going to go back to frame 0, and I'm going to move it up past the wind, and let's recalculate. There we go. So now they're not being affected by the wind. Okay, and if I wanted to, I could make them a different group right here so that they couldn't be affected by that wind. But I just moved it out of place. Okay, so now I need to go back because somehow warm water is being created when the hot and cold haven't even gotten there. Well, that wouldn't be good. So that doesn't make sense. So I'm going to go over to P for properties, and for the start frame, I'm going to choose 60. Okay, and so they won't start. It won't start emitting those particles until frame 60. So now, if we take a look, the water comes in and starts turning into warm water. Okay, now we have a lot of options of how we're going to actually display our water. Right now it's just particles, and particles aren't going to render. If we wanted it to look like these little particles, we'd need to make them partigons. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of hypervoxels, and that gives us several options. So let's go ahead and go to Control F6, which is the Volumetrics tab. Okay, and under Add Volumetric, I'm going to add hypervoxels. Double click. I can go ahead and close this panel right here. Okay, so let's start with the, we're going to do hot, cold, and warm. I'm just double clicking and that's going to activate it, same as coming up here and hitting activate. And we have some options. By default, the object type is going to be surface, and that could work. We could get that to look like water. We could play with the shading and stuff, but for this demonstration, I'm going to use sprites, and I'm going to show the particles. Okay, and I'm just going to size this up some. Let's try 50. It's a little big, so I'm going to go 30. Okay, and for warm water, let's just go with orange. And you can, of course, texture these. You can put sprites on there. You can actually put images when you're working with the object type sprite. But we're going to just use orange. And then I'm going to go over to hot. Let's increase the particle size for hot. I think we used 50. And let's show particles. And let's do the shading as hot. Let's use red. Okay, and let's go back to, instead of surface, we're going to use sprite as well, and we're going to make that red. Okay, and so now what we're going to do is go over to cold, make that sprite, make that blue, go over to geometry and show those as well. Okay, and it looks like our hot is a little bigger than our cold. Let's change that to 50. 50 is kind of going outside a little bit, so I'm going to change that to 40 and come over to hot and change that to 40 as well. And if we need to, we can move the particles. We can move the wind emitter a little bit to keep them in as well. But let's take a look. So now we've got hot water and cold water traveling down the pipe, coming over and turning into warm water. Now I could get it a little closer. And again, if you need to, you set it up as a different group. If for any reason you get particles that come outside of the pipe, one thing that you can do just as an added measure is select this pipe, go over to P for properties, and under dynamics, make it a collision object. Okay, so now the particles are going to collide up against the pipe, and we'll calculate that. So it's traveling, and now this is firing out. So if you're ever worried about if the particles are coming through, just turn the pipe into a collision object as well. But the wind emitter, that animation path wind emitter, makes it so much easier because it doesn't have to calculate bouncing off this pipe to get in the direction that you want. And again, if you wanted to, you could create the animation path to travel up this pipe and have the red and blue mixing. I just thought it would be nice to show that you could create another particle emitter and get a completely different set of particles, but make it look like these are coming together to combine into warm water. So that's just a quick look. There's a lot of different ways you can go about it, but I thought this would be a fun way to show off some of the tools in Lightwave.